Welcome to What's Next, previews, predictions, and prognostications. I'm glad I said that correctly. That's a tongue twister, John. Thanks for writing that. I'm your host, Rhett Power, and my co-host, John Baldoni, here on a beautiful, it's Tuesday or a Monday evening for us. I guess it's Tuesday morning for Martin.
Absolutely. It's 11 minutes past 11 in the morning on a beautiful Tuesday, and I'm in Sydney, Australia right now.
And I love this show because I'm in Brazil, Martin is in Australia, and John is in Michigan. And what this show is about, What Next, is about a show about that examines what we do now and where we go to prepare for what's next. Whether you own a company or work for one, you need information on what you can expect in the wake of COVID-19.
Great. We interview thought leaders and doers from the worlds of business, science, medicine, economics, media, and psychology, all of whom will help us shape the new normal. So welcome, Martin. It is such an honor to have you.
Thank you.
I want to tell our guests a little bit about you. This bio in 3 paragraphs is almost outstanding. Is outstanding, and you couldn't make it up. Martin is the founder and chairman of the Lindstrom Company, the world's leading business, brand, and culture transformation company. Operates in 5 continents and 30 countries. Time magazine named Martin Lindstrom one of the world's most influential 100 most influential people, and for 5 years running, Thinkers 50, the world's premier ranking resource of business icons, has selected Lindstrom to be among its top 50 business thinkers. Martin is a high-profile speaker, and when we used to speak in public, and the author of 7 New York Times best-selling books, translated into 60, count them, 60 languages. His book, Brand Sense, was critically acclaimed by the Wall Street Journal as one of the 5 best marketing books ever published. Okay. Small Data was praised as revolutionary, and Time magazine wrote about biology, which is a book we are going to talk about today, as a breakthrough. And I want to show biology. It's BYOLOGY, biology. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you, John. And what you didn't mention was that I actually wrote 8 books, and the 8th book was the first book I wrote. And sadly, it was so incredible bad that only my mom and my dad read it, and that's where I realized I really had to up my game a little bit. I'm glad that was not included in the bio though, but just to get the record full with all this bragging stuff, right?
I think everybody gets a break on their first book because mine was bad too.
Exactly.
I think you get a pass.
Thanks, Brett. I'm glad for that.
Well, thank you, Martin. We know one thing about you. You are a humble man.
Thank you.
Hey, Martin, I wanted to start off the questions sort of with a big sort of philosophical question, maybe. The pandemic was predicted years ago, and but when it struck, it seemed to take people by surprise. I mean, we've been talking about pandemics. We've had some in recent history, and not more than a few years ago. What is that sentiment, that being surprised by this, what does that say about human nature, you think?
I think what has happened over the years is that reality and perception has blurred together. I mean, in the United States, perception became reality, and suddenly you have a president, right? But it's also happening in Hollywood in all sorts of different ways. And one of the things I tend to say is that we have over the last 20 years been exposed for the longest and the most intensive pre-thriller, pre-COVID-19, because that has been all the movies, everything from Contagion to the James Bond movies to all those movies talking about how a virus will spread around the world. And as you look at this stuff, 2 things are happening. From a psychology point of view, addressing your question, I think people have said that was just in Hollywood, right? So therefore, when it finally happens, suddenly it becomes real. But I do think from the other point of view, and that's probably the more scary part, is that it has primed all of us to build up a sense of fear and a sense of rush when this finally happened, because that's what we've seen in all these movies. And therefore, you could say, in many ways, it's been a sleeper cell of fear in our brains. And we know a lot from our work with neuroscience that the amygdala, which really is the fear spot in our brain, is accumulating fear over the time. It means that if you have tried something horrible in your home where someone came in and broke into your home or whatever, you're probably going to be more afraid when you're walking on the street in a dark night, because fear accumulates across different channels. And we have been exposed for fear for so many years, whether that is the media pumping up fear, crime, sexual harassment, privacy issues, all those different things, that we are and have been on an alert all the last 10 years. That combined with the Hollywood, and that combined with an amplification happening because of social media. Remember when swine flu was released, I believe in the early beginning of 2000, 4 years after Facebook was released, by the way, infecting some 2 billion people with a B, and supposedly 203,000 people died. There was not this frenzy here. Now the numbers are completely different, yet we're all running around incredibly scared. So it's not a clear cut of answer I'm giving you. I would say on one hand, we've seen perception and we are surprised about it becomes reality. On the other hand, we've been primed so hard for so many years that we almost overreact. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all the frontline workers, that they're not doing the job or anything. I really have the strongest sympathy for everyone out there fighting and everyone being affected by this, including my friends. But I also want to say, putting it into that perspective, it makes you think, wow, why are we rushing to buy that toilet paper and that meat when it still is available in the stores? Kind of strange, right?
No.
That's fascinating. I mean, that's why I asked the question, because I think that aspect of it is fascinating and says so much about us as a people. But John, go ahead.
Martin, in biology, you talked about, which is for the coronavirus world. You have I love every chapter has a quote, and the one that jumped out at me was from Haruki Murakami, who said, "When you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in." That's what a storm is all about. Our show is trying to look ahead. So why is that quote so appropriate for where we are right now, Martin?
Well, I put it into the book before actually talking to one of my clients. His name is Tim Lowe, and he's the president of Lowe's, which is a mid-sized supermarket chain in the United States. And Tim said, so I've been through a huge transformation process with Lowe's, taking around 6 years, and we basically transformed the organization to become the most, I would say, innovative supermarket chain probably in the world. Certainly one of the most, if not the most successful at the moment. And that took 6 years. And Tim, he said to me, "Martin, are you aware of that the last 6 weeks we have achieved exactly the same transformation as we did over the last 6 years? And over the last 6 years, I tell you, we're working hard and fast." And he said to me, people who do not recognize the fact that when you go into this storm, that you fundamentally have to change as a consequence of COVID-19, did not get the message of all this stuff. You, no matter who you are, will fundamentally have to change. And so it fits very well with what Haruki is saying, that this storm is designed, inverted commas, to also make you change and reflect and see life in a different perspective. And I do think the issue I see and hear a lot is a lot of people are looking at it through a one-way or two-way mirror, observing the change, but feel they're sitting in a safe space. Well, it won't affect me that much. Well, guess what? You're wrong. You will see a fundamental change happening in terms of consumer behavior and confidence, in terms of depression and human psychology, in terms of how we walk and go into the offices and work in there. Just see recently, you're seeing real estate prices are collapsing in New York City because Amex and other companies are now closing their offices because there's no value in running an office where you have to cut down the staff to 2/3 because of the distancing. It's too expensive. So every aspect in life is going to change with this, whether you like it or not, and you better wake up.
Yes, I do agree. You have a chapter in the book called Always, which I love, by the way. And you talk about always look in the opposite direction, right?
Yeah.
What does that mean for us right now? What does that mean?
Well, it's a good question. And for me, I fundamentally believe that creativity is to combine two ordinary things in a new way. And that is really the essence of always looking the opposite direction. When everyone looks in this direction, you have to look the opposite way. And a good example of that is back in 2008, when we had our last financial meltdown, and where the car industry, as you know, was bailed out by the US government, or at least most of the brands were. Now, why did that happen? It happened because these car companies were asking a pretty sensible question, which is, do people have money at all to buy a car? And the conclusion were no, in the middle of a financial meltdown. So what did they do as a linear conclusion? They lowered the prices, and it didn't help, and the bailout happened. Now, there's one company, a Korean company called Hyundai, which decided to do consumer insight. And they decided to talk consumers and realized, guess what? People actually have the money. They're just afraid of using them in case they lose their job. So they created or introduced the Hyundai Assurance, the idea of that if you buy a car and within a year you lose your job, you can refund your car and get all your money back, no questions asked. Now, what was really brilliant about this was not only did Hyundai see a double-digit sales increase in 2008 and 2009, so the 2 years just in the lead off of the recession. They also, I spoke to the CEO 2 years later, the new CEO, and I said, tell me how many cars were returned? And he said 5. And that is thought-provoking for me because they look in the opposite direction. I think a lot of people right now are concluding that they're looking at the surface of the behavioral patterns and they're drawing conclusions, which may be right at first. But remember, 85% of everything you and I do every day is subconscious. They're deeply irrational. And a good example for you guys is both of you, and this is a question for you guys and all the viewers, of course, as well. Are you the type of person when you're watching television and the remote control is flat for batteries, that you press extra hard to squeeze the last drop of batteries out of the remote? Raise your hand, right? Right. Now, I was on a World Business Forum podcast just the other day and asked, I think we were about 5,000 people on the line, and I asked everyone through a survey, and 89% raised their hands. And now that's deeply irrational. Now, 85% of things we do every day is deeply irrational. Now, if I now combine the amygdala on top of that, the fear aspect, remember fear overrides everything else because our reptile brain really is all about survival before we evolve as a human species. And because of that, fear overrides everything because that's a way for us to protect ourselves and survive. Now, when you take that on top, which is what's happening right now, you start to understand why toilet paper is selling out, why people buy more condoms, and by the way, why people are watching more Netflix, and why people are using more time using coloring books, which is kind of intriguing thoughts. Why do people buy more puppies now? I just noticed that statistic. They buy more puppies because we are suppressed for the tactile sensation. So we are craving touch. And then we have a dog. This is the subconscious mind in action. That's what you have to understand, right?
Which brings us to our point. When we chatted with you as part of our Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches session, and you refer to it in biology about the somatic marker and then the negative somatic marker that we're going through right now in the pandemic. Can you explain what this is all about, Martin?
Absolutely. So somatic marker, spelled S-O-M-A-T-I-C. Somatic marker was invented by Antonio Damascus, a Portuguese professor, which later on moved to the US. And he realized using fMRI that you, in fact, by scanning your brain, will be able to see profound changes in your life physically appearing in your brain, which is really fascinating when you think about it. Now, you have tried it. You tried it with 9/11. I bet you remember where you were, who you're together with, even who you called, right, on that day. And that's called a negative somatic marker, what I call an emotional bookmark in our brains. Now, I have two views on this. The first view is that I believe that every generation will go through a profound somatic marker, a negative somatic marker, which are defining our generations. I bet you that you parents still are switching off the light. They're saving the food to the day after if there's anything left over. They're using the wrapping paper for the 15th time. And whenever you were a child, you looked at them and you said, what the heck are these guys on, right? Now, they were through a somatic marker. We are going into another negative somatic marker. So there's two things in mind here. First of all, every generation would be defined by that. But the second thing is we are in a negative somatic marker state right now. And what it means is it will have profound impact on how we're going to change our behavior. And if I put that into a little perspective here, we talk about in marketing something called entry points. Entry points is where you as a brand have an entry into a consumer's mind. It means when you are a kid, you grow up and the first time you go to school, that's an entry point for back to school products. And then the first time you meet your new boyfriend or girlfriend, that's an entry point. The first time I move away from home, that's an entry point. The first time I get my new job is an entry point. The first time I'm retiring or when I'm retiring, that's an entry point. These points are exactly what you've tried if you give birth to, or your wife is giving birth to a newborn baby. Suddenly there's baby strollers everywhere. You never see that many baby strollers, right? This is where you fine-tune your brain and you start to focus on something which is relevant for you. An entry point does that. Well, guess what? In human mankind, we always had 7 entry points. Now we have 8. And the 8th is actually coming out as a consequence of this experience we're going through with COVID-19, because what happens as a consequence is when people are going to leave this, they're going to behave differently, they're going to interact with people differently, they're going to work differently, they're going to eat differently, they're going to shop and entertain themselves differently. And that would be so profound that people will start to see the world completely different, and they'll start to see brands they never noticed because they are in a new frame of mindset. And there's other things will vanish. Because remember one thing, some of the biggest companies on planet Earth, GE, DM, FedEx, Trader Joe's, these companies, all of them were created 1 or 2 years after a recession. So this is the opportunity for you to create a new entry point, or at least tap into it and build a brand or a company around it.
I'm glad you mentioned puppies because a few minutes ago, because I noticed a Facebook post today. Somebody posted 3 puppies that they found. They were gone in 5 minutes, and I'd even thought about a puppy, and they were gone before I could even think about it. So I think you're right on that.
Well, let's just talk about that for a second, Brett, because this is really fascinating. One of the things I'm writing in the book, or the ebook, or the pocket book, Bali for Coronavirus World, is that we are suppressing ourselves for touch. Remember, our largest organ is the sense of touch. That's our skin. And we know today from different experiments. One was by Roy Burmaster, which did an experiment with rats, and he had 2 sets of rats. One set of rats were touched and fed on a very regular basis. The other set of control rats were fed, but they were not touched. And within a month, the first set of rats, the ones touched very frequently, were more happy, they ate more, and they're more motivated. And by the way, they lived substantially longer than the second pair of control rats. We have to understand that the tactile sensation is part of our human nature. And if we're not being touched, we go into depression. And that's the reason why the Japanese, of all people, of course, studied this for 2 decades and realized that people died quicker in elderly homes because they're not in touch, so to speak, with anyone of the outside world. So they, this is typical Japanese. Of course, they create a robot around it, and it becomes this robot seal where they can sit and pet it. And guess what? People are more happy. I'm not saying the answer to COVID-19 is robot seals, but I'm saying that we are out of touch. We are out of balance. And as I write about in one of my past books, Small Data, which I define as seemingly insignificant observations you make throughout the whole life. Well, then I say in the book, we are all out of balance. It may be I feel overweight. There's a Weight Watchers product for that. It may be I feel alone. Well, there's Match.com. It may be I feel insecure. Well, there's Tony Robbins for that. Well, we are out of balance now in terms of touch. And that is going to create an out of balance, counterbalance to it. And the counterbalance is really the reason why we see the increase of sales of puppies. It's also the reason why coloring books and pens are so popular right now, because people crave that tactile sensation. And talking about puppies, I was down shopping in a store the other day, and I never seen this before. This old lady went straight up to a dog and started to pet it, and of course the dog bite back, right? And then 5 minutes later, I saw the same thing happen with someone else. We never craved it so much. And from a rational point of view, when you look at the toilet paper issue, and you look at the remote control, and you look at the dogs being petted and selling out, you say, oh, people are stupid. But from a subconscious point of view, it's pretty natural what's going on. And that's my message to everyone. You have to understand the 85%, because then you'll also understand how your business is going to be redesigned, right?
Martin, I want to pick out freelance on this point about touch. And the point of our show is to try to get as much as we can beyond the here and now. So you talked about touch right now. Where will we be a year from now? What's your prognostication?
I think there's going to happen 3 things which are going to be profound. I think, first of all, as the gates are open to the real world, people will rush out very quickly. They'll go to restaurants very quickly. They'll eat the first meal as it is their last meal. And then what will happen is that people will start to wake up and they'll ask themselves a question: should I do this? I can't count the number of people who have said to me, I realized through this crisis, I don't need all that stuff anymore. And when people say that, it becomes very scary, at least if you live in the world we live in now, which is designed around consumption. I'm not necessarily a big fan of consumption, but I have to say one thing: the wheels are designed around it. If we don't consume, there's not the money flow required for us to have the lifestyle we once had. And if people start to come with thoughts, that's very problematic. I went down to my local coffee shop yesterday, and I come there for many years. And I said to the guy, so he had a pizza store as well built into it. I said, so when are you going to open the in-dining pizza? He said, never. I said, well, why? He said, I had 12 staff, and now I have 2. And I realized I earn exactly the same amount of money, so I just do takeaway. Those 2 comments are the most scary ones, because that means that people are going to spend less money, and there's going to be more unemployed people. And then both you and I know what's going to happen. Then we're going to go into a recession. So the first aspect is people are going to reevaluate their life. And I think a year from now, the halo effect of the fact that people are not spending more, not because they don't have the money, but because they're afraid of not having the money if they're fired, and the depression coming as a consequence of people not being in touch to this extent, or having these second thoughts, which I never had before, was scary. That is going to mean that people will see more depression. We will see people's the health rate will go down. People are holding back going to the hospitals now because they're afraid of they will obtain COVID-19 or they're occupying the health system. So people are holding back. So we'll see a surge in medication. We'll see a surge in people going down with depression. We'll see a surge in suicide for sure, sadly. We will see a surge in people getting out of touch with other people. So that is the first scary part. The second part I think we will see is that we will see a counterbalance kicking in. People will realize, and this is the good news, that they love people and they never said it to them. People realize they've been unaccessible, they've been on this treadmill, and people literally have fallen off this now. So I think we actually will see a not much deeper, less superficial interaction between people when people are finally together in a physical format, where they say things almost like, I wish I said that to my dad before he died, type of scenario. I think we're going to see that, which is super healthy. I also think on a healthy note, people will ask themselves, how come suddenly the planet Earth became more clean? As you noticed in my book, I wrote about how IQ Air was one of the leading air filtering systems in the world coming out of Switzerland, have noticed a drop in pollution in Los Angeles of 51%, and around the world, with the exception of one city, all of them has gone down. So that is the good news. And the last piece of news I think we will see is that people will question the role of brands and companies. They will say, do you know what? I was actually pretty okay with that little solution I had there, which were not that expensive. And by the way, I don't need these brands. I need a whole new type of direction in my life. So I'm going to buy something completely different. I'm going to redesign my life. I'm going to work from home. And because of that, I'm going to change my behavior. So this entry door is going to basically put everything up and down, and it will change. And we'll out of that see an enormous amount of new businesses coming out, which we would never have been able to imagine. And we will see an enormous amount of businesses completely collapse. And that will create this whole effect, rollover effect through the society. So I think what we'll see happening now would be profound, and it will question a lot of things. And it's almost like we're shaking this glass now with stuff in it, and we will see an outcome which I think neither you nor I can predict. But I think these three factors certainly will be the reason why things will change, right?
You're absolutely right. I was speaking with the CEO of Charity Water the other day, and this is a $100 million charity, and he was saying, look, we're going to get rid of our whole New York office, and we're going to we're going to get rid of our new Manhattan office, and we're going to work from home. We're going to completely redesign the way we do things. And I think this
is a problem. Sorry for interrupting, but this is a problem, Brett, because the issue here is when you start to work from home from a financial point of view, and I spoke to a lot of our clients, CEOs of these Fortune 100 companies, which you have behind your wall almost there, right? I spoke to these guys, and they all say to us, one medical company said to me, hey, I realized we don't need our offices, and I realized our travel budget is halved. And in fact, we don't need our reps on the road anymore. So I'm going to change that. And I said to him, hey, hang on for a second here. What is the most important thing in a company? Is it the product or is it the culture? It's a culture. How are you going to build a culture through a little screen where you are sitting in isolation? You may be very productive, but when I talk to people, they say to me, first of all, they don't know the difference between Sunday and Monday and Tuesday anymore. In fact, they lost completely control of this. Is that the case with you guys as well?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay,
definitely.
So this is the first insight. The second thing inside, they're saying, I wake up at 2 a.m. and I want to have breakfast, and at 5 p.m. Everything is upside down. I'm dropping more balls than I've ever done in my life, and I feel I'm working as hard as I've ever done, and I achieve nothing. Right? That is what people are saying. Is that really the life you want to have? And then remember, we have the touch on top of it, meaning we are out of touch, both emotionally and physically. So that will further amplify the depression we're talking about. Companies will have to do a matrix of it, or a mixture of it, where some people absolutely love it because they haven't been together with the kids, and suddenly the son to the dad is saying, hey, are you dad? Dad, I didn't know you were looking like that, right? You don't need the name badge anymore, right? And they will love this because they have their own ecosystem, they can live with it. And then there will be 50% of the population which will actually just go down. And we need to understand people are individual, and we need to design a format around it. And that's not what we're doing now. Now we're just saying one size fits all, right? Let's just go for home offices for the whole world, right?
Let me ask you this, because I think you were talking about it earlier, and I wanted to dive into this question a little bit more about fear. And how do we take fear that we're operating under right now? And I think people are making decisions based on fear. How do we turn that into an advantage?
Well, it depends on how advantage is used, because now, of course, I'm super careful here about abusing COVID-19 to a personal gain. But what I want to say is, with fear, you always need to find the counterbalance. And I think one of the counterbalances is that people use an unproportionate amount of time washing hands at the moment because they're afraid of things around them. And I'm sure you caught yourself of cleansing your hands 19 times in an hour, right? Where actually,
for me.
Okay, fair enough. Where actually we didn't need to do that much, but we do it anyway just to be sure. So as I'm saying now, if we just take that aspect of fear, why is there no washing machines for shopping carts? I spoke to one of my clients about it the other day. How come the cinemas are not designed so you have separation seals between each of the seats? You can put them in, and then you have then there's no problem going to the cinema, I would assume. How come the lavatories on airplanes are not self-rinsing? All these different things are things which doesn't exist today, really, but which could be invented in a heartbeat. You know what? A friend of mine, I can't even believe it. It's amazing. I haven't spoken to him for some while, and then this guy. He had his own pizza store, okay, and it didn't do particularly well. And with this crisis, everything collapsed. So I thought, oh, I better talk to this guy and hear what he's doing, and expect him to have this depression coming out of the phone, right? It's just amazing. So why? Said because I've created this. I bought this self-rinsing clinical machines, which are spraying walls with chemicals or whatever. I bought that from a friend of mine, and I'm going to all elderly homes, all schools, and I'm cleaning everything. And my business has never been as good. that is, and who's a pizza man? Okay, think about this. If a pizza man can jump out of the shoes and do this, I'm blown away. And that is my answer back to you. There's always something which is fulfilling that need you have. And then do me a favor, it's not just fear, it's also being alone. It is the unknown of the unknown. It's all those multiple factors you have, which is like rings in water, spinning out of fear, but that just have different flavors of it. That and each of those are representing opportunities as well, right?
Speaking up on this theme, and this is really Rhett's territory because he's a startup expert and coaches people on starting their own businesses. And I advise our audience to check out his latest article in Forbes where he talks about going for funding now. But you have a quote that jumped out at me in your book, Biology, where you said, listen to the dreamers in your organization.
Yeah.
On the surface, I know what that means, but is there a deeper meaning to it, Martin?
I think that what I've learned in culture and culture transformation, because that's, of course, what I work with every day, is that you have multiple people profiles in the organization. Some of them are very overt. Some of them are overt because they position themselves to get high in the hierarchy. And then you have those subtle people which have a very clear view about where to go. They're just not sharing it with anyone. And quite often they're the ones you should listen to. I think we've done more than 150 transformations of big companies around the world, and in all 150 cases, I didn't come up with the idea. We spotted the ideas and helped amplify for the organization, but the ideas came up from the employees. So what I would like anyone and everyone to do is to spot those dreamers and ask them right now, where do you see our organization go? And I'll give you one example from a company called Intertek, which is a quality assurance company. It's a client of ours. They're one of the largest in the world. You guys know them indirectly because they're the ones which are controlling all the food going into White House or on the black box of Air Force One, but also the one testing the suitcases you use in the airports so the wheels are not falling off, or any other quality assurance. And André Lacroix was the CEO there, former Disney guy, and we've been working together for many years. And he talked to people inside the organization, and one guy said, listen, with all our quality assurance, that's great. But in fact, there's another dimension which is really interesting here. What do these hotels and airline companies do when they come back to reality? What do they do? And the answer was very interesting. They don't know what they do. How are you going to clean all these hotel rooms? And how is the consumer going to know that these rooms actually are safe so you don't have to wash your hands, John, 17 times, right? So he basically said, why don't we create this assurance certification system? And basically you just put that on, and it says it's Intertek or what's called ProTech verified. So you go into this room and you know they have, as an independent party, certified this. And guess what? This is good to go. Or on the airline seat, on the seatbelt, it says Intertek on it. Wow, I feel safe. Brilliant idea, super simple idea. And to roll it out, he rolled it out in 6 weeks globally, right? And we're talking about more than 100 countries, right? Fantastic. But what I'm saying to you is that came out of a dreamer. It came out of a person who saw things in a perspective. These are the people right now you should listen to, not the naysayers, and not the people which always is first in line, but the dreamers.
You know, this is a sweet spot of mine, and I did a piece on it. And in times of crisis, cream rises to the top, and it's often aligned to your idea of dreamers. It's And I know of so many people who've turned around companies. It's look for people who've been passed over or shunted to the side. And when the heat's on, these people have the ability to step forward and make that positive difference, whether they're dreamers or doers, because you well know you need both. It's important for anyone listening here to, who on your team is rising to the occasion and embracing this challenge. So,
yeah. Absolutely, you're spot on in this, and I think what we're seeing right now probably seems straightforward when everyone is listening and watching here. But when you're running a day-to-day machine as well, and you have to make the wheel spin, you have to meet the financial requirements to pay the salary for everyone, it's incredibly hard to have the mental capacity to think about these more lofty, visionary thoughts. So I think it's very important that you separate your teams. And you use your team in a proactive way. And I'll give you another example. So I go to this restaurant, favorite restaurant of mine, and in that restaurant, I know the owner very well, and he's converting everything around to takeaway. So I started by this takeaway, and just before, I'm in Australia right now, so just before Sydney wakes up, because now all restaurants are opening, I say to him about a week before, I say, hey, so how are you going to change? He said, oh, well, business as usual. I said, well, listen, how are you going to change the way you're serving people here in this restaurant? He said, well, we will be careful of sanitary issues and stuff like that. I said to him, you have to take the disadvantage and turn it into your advantage. And because here's the issue, as the restaurants have been opening up in Australia, the rules are that you cannot be more than 10 people in a restaurant at any given time, and you need to have 6 feet distance between each of the tables. So I said to them, how would you use that in your advantages? And he said, I don't know. I said, think about this. Distance means that you actually can roll your trolleys in between. You can actually have better traffic flow, right? And the fact that there is more waiters now for fewer staff means that they have more time. So why don't you reintroduce the show? Now, I come from Europe. In Europe, they have something called crêpe de cassette, which is where you do these pancakes with fires, and it's beautiful. Right. Sometimes you have the show with this Irish coffee, where it's a beautiful show, or you have flambé, you have whatever. All these shows, which is I think what you and I loved once it was around, and then it disappeared for all sorts of different reasons. I said to him, why don't you reintroduce it? And by the way, why don't you give each of your staff member that assignment to invent their own little show? And once you open the doors, they run that. And he did that. And the day after, everyone was going through their own training of how to create a show and run it infrastructure-wise in the restaurant. This is my message to you. He didn't do it. He outsourced it to his waiters, which were standing there anyway, really a little bit in standby position. And he created this amazing restaurant experience, which opened about a week ago. And people are coming back in lines. They're lining up to get into this restaurant with 10 people in it. And guess what? They can now charge more.
And he's doing better than he was.
A quick thought, and I'll throw it to Brett. Rhett, you had a good thought there, and it's important for a leader to understand. Your friend, look to your advice was ask the waiters. So in other words, ideas don't have to come from the leader's head. It's giving them permission to be creative. And Rhett, as our resident entrepreneur, knows all about that. So.
Yeah,
well, I don't know about that, but thank you. I just wanted to shout out to a few people who are online and who are commenting. Gabrielle, thank you so much. Susan, thank you. Arguwal, thank you. He says great insight, Martin. Amy is MG100, and she says, yes, a CEO, I want to read this comment, and Martin, because it echoes what you said a few minutes ago. Yes, I had a CFO client who told me this week the biggest surprise has been that we can run this company remote, but half the company won't feel that way.
Yeah, but Amy, you're absolutely right. And I do think that you need to, as a business leader or owner, to ask yourself a fundamental question: what are you doing as an organization for human mankind as a consequence of COVID-19? What is the one thing you're going to do beside earning money, I think this is a bit of a wake-up call. And that is one of the aspects you need to focus on, to find the right work-life balance, which are fitting to people's lifestyle rather to the lifestyle of a company, right?
Yeah, I don't disagree. I agree wholeheartedly on that. John, do you want to ask? You wanted to ask your Montgomery.
Oh, yeah. Mark knows, I'm a history buff, and I have to admit, I'm going to confess, I read this little story in biology where you quoted Bernard Montgomery, who was head of the British forces in World War II, and he reported, which he did not like, to an American, Eisenhower, and it was the right thing. But you talked about the messaging that the two men had. Montgomery had one style, Eisenhower had another. And I think it's germane to our situation. Do you want to tell us about that, Martin?
Yeah, absolutely, John. Well, Montgomery, as proud as he was and as good as he was, the reality was he did this incredible talk on the radio, and he was rallying the troops, and he was talking a lot about how we have an enemy and we have to fight against the enemy and stuff like that, typical military style. Where the other leader, the American leader, actually supposedly and anecdotally went down prior to this whole day, and he talked to the troops on the beaches, and he held the arm around some of them, and he said, "How's your family? And you're going to fight for your family, and we are here with you." And what was interesting with him was that parents, when they were sending their children to war, they really didn't send them to war. They sent it to work for him, because they bought him as a person and the values he stood for. And that was a reason why I think he was such an amazing leader. I think what we can use in the leadership style today in our world is that, and let me give you an example for one of our clients. One of our clients is Maersk. It's the largest shipping company in the world. They sit on 21% of all trade. And they had a cyber attack some 3 years ago. And when I say cyber attack, I mean cyber attack. Literally, I was in the offices and the entire system shut down worldwide, and they lost, in theory, access to 21% of all trade in the world. And what was really fascinating was, because of this cyber attack, they could not even communicate with people using emails or any calls. So the leaders of each of the offices actually stood up, went out of the offices, started to walk the offices twice a day and talk to people. And they really had a very strong sense of camaraderie. Now, even more fascinating was, I did sessions with lots of people across the organization, thousands, and I asked them, past the cyber attack, which were a huge disaster for them, but I asked them, how did it feel like? And every single person said it was like the old Maersk had come back again. We had a sense of camaraderie. We were given a mandate just to think by ourselves and use common sense. And in fact, I missed that time, and that came back. Now, then, of course, I said to Maersk the other day, hey, what are you doing now when you can't walk around these offices? And one person said to me, an executive, said, well, listen, we actually set up virtual lunches across time zones, across continents, in whatever format we can, where people from home eat and where they talk about life. And that has actually maintained the culture dimension of the organization. And I think this is where the leader have to, in my opinion, stand up. The one thing is, of course, to send out these emails and these instructions and milk the machine and optimize it so we're not losing money and going broke. But the other aspect is, you have to remember that your staff probably are more fearful than you are at the moment, because they really have the unknown. And you have to put yourself in the mindset of them. And that means you have to be much more present, because what we know today from all our work with psychology, and I'm actually talking a lot about that in my next book, which is coming out. That's a real physical book you can buy, which comes out January next year, where I talk about how time zones are different. Not the time zones you and I know, but the perception of time. And let me just explain that very briefly. If you go from destination A to B, I bet you agree with me that it takes longer time than when you go from B to A. Strangely enough, it's like, oh, that was fast back home, right? That's because we render the data in a different way. The brain has already rendered the data, so we're playing a little video in our mind, and that means the time feels like it's going different. Now, we know today when there's a crisis going on, our brain renders differently. And the best example point in case here is from Australia, where they have a lot of bushfires, the same as in California. And where these bushfires goes incredibly fast, like a fireball through the forest. And when I interviewed firefighters and asked them about the experience being in the front line, they all said to me, it's like I experience time slower when it happens. It's like everything goes down to slow motion and I see the fight spread very slow. It's like I can overreact because my brain goes on overdrive. So as this is happening, time perception changes. What we know today is when you are in a crisis, your time is perceived slower. What it means is people require more updates, more frequent updates. So that means in the old days, you would have sent out a newsletter every month. Now you do it every day, right? And this is very different leadership mindset, because it means that you actually have to see the time zone perception through the eyes of the employees rather than through what you've done in the past, right?
Martin, what is, and we've got to wrap it up. I know we've got to be respectful of your time, but what I'm fascinated by is the question of is this. I think this is going to have profound changes on the way we lead people. What is your take on that? I mean, I just think that I don't quite understand yet what that means, but I think it's just we're gonna have to lead differently.
I think that it's a good question, Rhett, and I think the reality here is that this is, if you are a leader right now, this is the moment where you are going to define your legacy. And I mean it. You can prove that you earned a little bit more money than the previous CEO, or that your share price is going up a little bit more, or the awareness is a little bit higher, or you sold more product, whatever it is. That's not going to create your legacy. Right now, you are creating your legacy. As Tom Peters said on a call the other day, he said, no one ever wrote on their thumbstone, I made $9.265 million.
Right.
And this is a little bit where we are. So this is the moment where you as a leader will be defined, and you'll be defined by 3 criteria. You'll be defined about how well did you see and understand the situation and realize you were in a crisis. And I'm saying this in a very dramatic way, because I think a lot of people say there is a crisis, but they don't realize they are in a crisis, and crisis means you have to change, right? So that is the first one. The second thing they have to say is, how well did they see the world from the consumers or the customer's point of view, read their minds, and identify the out of balances and redesign the product services around that. And the third, and perhaps the most important thing, is how well did they understand the psychology of their employees and were able to build a culture, maintain a culture through this after COVID-19, and really be there for the staff in that downtime they had, so they felt they had someone they could follow, just as we saw with D-Day.
I couldn't agree more. And I think consumers, not only your employees, but I agree with you on the consumer part of that. I think consumers, as you were talking about a little while ago, our habits are going to change, and their expectations of companies. I mean, we already make decisions now based on I make decisions based on a company's CEO and what they do, and and the stances they take politically, or we already make those decisions because we have that information. But I think even more so, the brands that really do this well and handle this well are going to come out of this better. I think. I think you're right.
Absolutely.
This has been fantastic. I mean, I could talk for hours with you. This is just so insightful, Martin. Where can we get the book? Can we get it? It's on Amazon, I know.
No, it's not. Well, it's not on Amazon.
It's
So
not.
this is a little bit of a gift from me to everyone out there. Because I decided, instead of me going around earning money on the crisis, I'd rather share my humble view about what's happening, and hopefully giving everyone some insight they can use in their businesses or organizations. So it's a free of charge. It's called The Biology for a Coronavirus World. And you can find it by going into my website. And my website address is martinlindstrom.com. martinlindstrom.com, martinlindstrom.com. You can find me on all social medias out there. It's pretty straightforward. Just type in my name, and there you'll be asked to put in your email address and your name, and then we will email it to you straight away in a split second. And then hopefully it will give you a little bit of alternative thoughts about what's going on in the life and what you can do. By the way, it's an easy read. It's only, I think, 65 pages, so it will take an hour to read.
And I said this to you, Martin, before, biology is a sweet read. You are a very good writer, and the content is exceptional. But you write very well, and I invite listeners and watchers to go to your site, martinlindstrom.com, and download a copy. Free.
And we'll put a link in this broadcast so that we can make it easy for you to do that. Martin, thank you so much. John, thank you. It's always a pleasure to host with you. This is What's Next. We do this every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so please join us. We've got a great lineup. John, we've got Ed Massey next week.
We have Elliot Massey next week.
Right.
And then we have two medical professionals, Dr. Anna Useem and Dr. Julie Rosenberg, to talk about the mental and physical aspects of COVID-19 and what we can expect going forward, and many more coming down the pike.
Wow.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Rhett, John, all the viewers out there, thank you so much. Keep up your good work and stay strong.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you. Bye-bye.